and we're with Jenn Sutherland, going to be talking about preparing young people for work, which I'm really excited about hearing this conversation, as I've got a 16-year-old who is kind of in that stage of like, now she can work in this country. So we're in West London, and the fact that, you know, she's kind of trying to decide where's her course of action, really, depending on her interests. And so she is starting to dabble in the world of work, but I can't wait to hear about what you'd have to say. Beneficial things.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. Really.
Great. So are you ready for me to start, or should we wait another minute? What's your hope?
Yeah, let's see. There was just that one. Christine is in. So I think let's go ahead and get started. If you wouldn't mind just introducing yourself and a little bit about what you do, and then we can get going.
I'm happy to. And I want to let people know also that my business partner, Leah Jovy-Ford, is supposed to be joining us. And she's had an unexpected morning of train drama in Switzerland. And so she's going to be jumping in here at some point in the next few minutes. And I just appreciate everyone's grace and patience. This is part of the remote work and the remote lifestyle, and conferencing, is that not everything tech goes to plan always. So my name is Jenn Sutherland. I'm the CEO of Omnis Education now, but a little background on sort of who I am and why I'm here. I homeschooled my kids from the time they were born until they went to university. I started my life as a teacher, and I remember coming home really shortly after I had started teaching, within the first year, and saying to my husband, "Gosh, I don't know what we're going to do if we have kids, but it can't be this," which was... That's a super demoralizing thing to come to after just having put all the time, money, effort, education into yourself to do a thing, and then getting into the system and realizing, wow, I can't participate in this, recognizing that it's doing harm to teachers, to kids, to, all the ways.
That actually was my same exact story, Jen, by the way.
Was it really?
But it was,
gosh,
yeah.
That's amazing. Well, we'll have to talk more about that at some point, Brittany. Yeah, but knowing what you don't want to do and knowing what you do want to do are two wildly different things. And so what that precipitated for me was about 5 or 6 years of really reading and studying and just re-educating myself on what is this thing that we do called learning? What's the purpose of education? What are we trying to accomplish here? And in the process of that, we started having kids. So we have 4 children. They're now grown. They are 26, 24, 22, and 20. It's an even year. And my husband and I are celebrating because we've had teenagers in this house for 13 years. Wow. And as of next month, we don't have any more teenagers, which is wild to consider. And they have all launched successfully into their lives, their careers, their world of work a little bit early by some people's standards. Our youngest one, who's turning 20, he moved out when he was about 17 and a half, 18 during the pandemic. And it's been such a fun journey to watch them grow up, to watch the ways in which they were prepared for the world of work. And then as they have become young adults and attended university or crafted their own path or started work, to hear from them the feedback around what their peers have as far as experience and whether or not they were prepared for the world of work, for university, for whatever's next. And the general consensus has been no, that they really weren't. And so that's precipitated some neat conversations, because the way we chose to homeschool our children was world schooling. So we traveled full time for about 12 years, from the time my oldest was 11 until she was ready to start university. And that experience really prepared our kids for the real world in ways we couldn't have anticipated. All the things you sort of plan for as a parent don't end up being the important things in the end. The world teaches them other things. When they reintegrated into university, we were, when she did, my oldest, we were back in the system. And it was really interesting to observe the differences and to think forward about the ways in which schooling isn't actually providing for young people what it is supposed to be providing for them. And so our talk today is a little bit about that, preparing learners for the world of work, where the system has failed on that, what we should be doing instead. I'm sure that this group you're all home educators, you're all people who think differently about education. You're viscerally aware of the problems. That's why your kids aren't in the system. From a historical perspective, of course, we all know that the school system was built and designed around the Industrial Revolution. Preparing people for the world of work was the specific mandate, at least in North America when it began, of the school systems. And that homogenous way of thinking and being and learning and working between bells, set up for factory production, was really intentional. And the jury is out. Arguments can be made on either side, whether it works to begin with or not. But certainly the system as it is not in any way related to what the real world feels like now for most people. Are there some exceptions to that? I'm sure there are. Does the school system serve some students? It definitely does. My guesstimate as a former teacher and having done the work I've done in the alternative ed community for the last 20 years is that at best, the school system probably serves about 30% of the students that are in it. So we have perhaps a 60% failure rate or, suboptimal outcomes rate. And if you think about that, like where else in the world do you accept a 60% failure rate as the status quo, as okay, and as something that you continue to pour not only trillions of dollars into, but the absolute brain trust of humanity and of the future with young minds? It doesn't make any sense that we perpetuate this system that is not in fact designed for or serving the communities today. One of the things that I found super interesting in 2018 was when Apple and Google both came out and they said they were no longer going to require a college degree for new hires at their two companies. And I thought, I read that article and I thought, wow, that's the death knell to me of public education, because when the big companies, the tech giants, the people who are driving forward the world of work and, what it's going to be like in the next phase of humanity, when they say, yeah, actually what you're doing isn't really serving us very well, so thanks, but no thanks. We're much more interested in seeing what people can do. I was surprised that schools and that alternative educators specifically didn't sit up and pay more attention to that, because I think that was the point at which it was, it was almost like a decree from on high. This no longer serves the future. And yet we've continued to perpetuate the system. Mm-hmm. So that piece of it, I think, is really important. You know what I realized, Brittany? I didn't mention at the beginning. If people have questions, you put it in there. Feel free to drop your questions here. Yes, absolutely. If you have questions, if you have comments, if you have thoughts, things you'd like to add, by all means, drop them in there. Our intention is for this to be discussion and sharing as much as it is, Leah and I talking about one of the things that we're passionate about and we love.
Well, we'd love to hear. I mean, Lisa, I would love to hear. And I don't know if this was something that you're going to go into, but just, you said that as home educators, we all know these things, but I think we definitely need to be reminded these things and continue to be affirmed in these things over and over again, because so often, and we've been home educating our family, all the way through as well, but I still, we have those moments of doubt, and you're like, am I really doing the right thing by allowing them this alternative path? But I'd love to hear, just with your kids specifically, if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit about their individual paths, maybe. Well,
totally. Yeah, you're so right. And I think especially as they move into the teen years, people will say to you, oh, well, of course you'll home educate when they're little because it doesn't really matter. But then now that they're teens and they need to do high school or secondary, or they need to take the tests, of course you're going to put them back in the system. And I was like, why would I turn over my life's work at the most vital point to a system that we know is not working? Like, no, of course I'm not sending them to school. That's a terrible idea. But there is a lot of societal pressure, right, to do that kind of thing. So for my kids specifically, my oldest is named Hannah. She's 26. She started her university work when she was 15, 16, when we were traveling through Thailand and Indonesia. I remember a big struggle trying to get university books and stuff shipped to Borneo once, which was hilarious. So she started doing that online. And by the time she was ready to go to university at 8, I think she went at 18, she had, a ton of credits that she could transfer. So that was getting her into schools was very easy. She'd already demonstrated that she could do the work. And about the same time that she started the university work, she came to me and she said, Mom, I think I need to start a business. I was like, okay, why? She said, well, because when I move out when I'm 18, I'm going to need to support myself. I was like, you're a genius. Great idea. And so she did. And that business did support her through university. We paid for her school costs, but she paid for her cost of living and everything else. And at 18, she was the only person that she knew that was not, on some sort of financial assistance from her parents for her life and her day to day. And she graduated. She attended the #3 university in Canada. It's called Queen's University, the oldest school in the country. Great school. And she graduated at the very top of her program with a degree in geography with distinction, having never been to school a day in her life. And my kids are not super geniuses by any means. They're just an example of what young people can do when given a different set of opportunities and tools. So that was fun. And then when she graduated, she turned down a job in her field because she wanted to return to the business that she'd been building because it was doing really well. And her whole last year of school, she was pretty frustrated actually, because she didn't have the time she needed to invest in her business because she was studying, but she was studying because it was something she loved and really wanted to know more about. So that's been a fun cycle to watch as well. My second son, first son, second child, Gabe, is 24. He's a boat builder and a captain of vessels, anything under 200 tons. He lives in the United States now. And he started his university work on a sailing ship crossing the Med and the Atlantic when he was 17, and got, transferred that credit into the big maritime university in Halifax in Canada. And then after he was enrolled, we realized that there was not a degree path that suited what he wanted to do. And so he came to me, having been largely a self-directed teen his whole life. He said, Mom, like, this isn't going to work. I don't want to put your money into this and then graduate and not have it be the thing I want to do. And then I have to go reskill and do this to do what I want to do. How would you feel if I just sort of charted my own course? I know what I need to do. I've got to get these certifications. And I said to him, great. I mean, go for it. This is the outcome we want, right? But if you fail at this and you end up back on the couch, we're going to revisit this discussion and, we'll see what happens. And so he's done that, and he's completely self-directed his adult career path, and he's doing great. He hasn't asked me for money since he was 18. So that's kind of the bottom line for me. And he's at a point in his career now that most people in his industry are not until they're 34 or 35, because he was able to start early and begin as he meant to go. And through his teen years, of course, he'd spent a lot of time working on some of the things that he needed as foundation stones for his career education. And my #3 son is a chef. He just graduated last year from the big chef school in Toronto. Launching as a chef during the pandemic is not ideal, in case anyone was wondering. And Canada has had restaurants closed half of this last year. And yet he's doing fine. He's just plugging along. And the quote from him mid-pandemic when his university sent him home was, well, our whole lives have prepared us for the pandemic. And by that, he meant they knew how to do hard things. They knew how to do with less. They knew how to educate themselves. The online learning thing wasn't a deal for them. And when he said that, I was like, oh gosh, like, I hope that's a good thing. That wasn't our goal. But it was a good thing for him because it allowed him to build forward when lots of other people in his demographic and his friend group were really stalled out and pretty upset by it. And then the last one, he was 20. He's studying to be a commercial pilot. He started flying when he was 15. That got paused during the pandemic because you cannot social distance in a training plane. It is not possible. So he has spent this last year working and, putting away $10,000 so that he doesn't have to ask us for money during school either. And he's on to commercial flight school. So that's my little tribe of people that haven't been to school and who grew up a little strange and who are great at charting their own course.
That's so incredible. And something just struck me when I think it was your third talking about, he was that much farther ahead of sort of his peers in his field.
Yeah.
My brother shared a very similar thing. He's in motion graphics, an artist. And, in that industry, there's just like, he said he always feels a little bit behind because there's always something new. Well, it just happens that my 12-year-old son is into film and things. And, to hear my brother even say, like, I can't imagine if I could have started to do at 12 and didn't have to wait till my, second or third year in university until I could start doing what I have been wanting to do for so long. But I think the stigma of, aren't they going to be behind? Aren't they going to be behind? And there's a comment,
Yeah.
asking about
I
GCSEs.
see
What
about
about
the GCSEs.
GCSEs? Like, and when
Yeah.
it's just the irony of like, actually, they're light years ahead, and you just don't even know it yet. It won't show
Yeah.
itself perhaps until later, but.
Well, and this is one of the things, like, to the GCSE question. So y'all know, my kids didn't take one standardized test ever. They didn't take the SATs, they didn't take the GCSEs, they didn't take any of those things. And they all got accepted to their first choice schools. And I have a particular way of doing that I've developed over the years and helped lots of people with. And if you have questions about that, send me a note. I'd be very happy to chat with you and help in any way I can, because there are hacks, there are ways around that. But it also leads really well into sort of the next piece, which is, are they going to be behind? What does that even mean? Behind is relative, first of all. And the days of a set body of curricular knowledge that we all need to download, and so that we can, be functional adults and do the next thing, that completely disappeared and became absolutely obsolete the minute we could say, hey, Siri, because your kids have the entire body of human knowledge in their back pocket at any time. So it's not a matter of, can we teach it all? No, of course we can't teach it all. That's not possible, nor can the schools. And it's not even about what should we teach, because they can access anything they want. It's really about teaching them to learn how to think critically, how to manipulate knowledge, how to self-direct, when you're stuck. How do you know what to do next? How do you figure that out? Those are the application skills, are the things that they need to know. And they also need tools, right? The tools that are used now, plus also things that we think might set them up to be able to use the tools of the future, whatever those are. So one of the things that Leah and I and our team did at Omnis Education was, after, the first part of the pandemic, we all kept thinking, okay, 6 more weeks and this is going to pass. Well, that didn't happen. We took a step back last fall and said, gee, if we were to reinvent education, if we didn't know anything about this structural framework that we've all been subjected to, if we did have access to everything we know about technology, the way people work, actually what the world looks like and feels like as adults, what would we design as school? Or not even school, but just as education, what would be the process for human learning? And that was a really fun exercise to have. And if people have ideas about that, I'd love for you to drop, like, what are your ideas of if we didn't have this structure that we're all sort of struggling to get through or break out of, what would learning look like? And the thing that we gravitated to was, well, it actually wouldn't look any different than it ever has in the history of the world. People have self-directed, have learned the next thing, have adapted and evolved in terms of how they use tools and what they do with them and what work looks like from the beginning of time. And the school system has been this 250-year experiment that has been marginally successful to an abject failure, depending on who you ask. But that's the experiment, that's the abnormality. And so when people talk about alternative education, like it's something that's weirded out on the edges, for like, no, guys, actually, this is just how people learn, right? We can be trusted to learn. We all self-direct. And the story of was it your brother or your uncle?
My brother.
Or your friend that was saying, like, what if I could have just done this from the beginning? Well, what if he could? Like, that's the ideal, right? Why do we magically not trust young people as soon as they turn 5 and until they're 18? What is it about that window that we're so terrified to just say, yeah, we believe in you. You know who you are, you know what you need, you have the tools you need. Oh, you're stuck. Okay, well, here are some ways other humans have solved that problem in the past. Here are some ways that people you admire might suggest that you work your way forward. Why is that all of a sudden obsolete for that little block? And so, we returned to that. The other thing that we recognized as an absolute artificial construct is this idea of subjects: history, geography, science, literature. You get into homeschool groups and people are like, oh my gosh, what are you using to teach writing? What are you using for science? What are you using for history? And among the things that we recognized is that artificial division of knowledge really reduces relevancy, because it takes everything out of context. And you hear people talking all the time about the importance of learning being relevant. And we believe that if there was like a statement for the reform in education, it would be learning must be relevant. But what is relevant? Who decides that? The only person who can decide what's relevant is the learner. And you have to trust the learner in order to believe, to believe that what they're doing is relevant. So that for us, like, there's a lot of unsnarling of old ideas, and most of it is with us, right? Like, most of it's the parents, most of it's the older people who are worried about whether they're behind or what's happening. The kids themselves are fine. You trust them, they learn the next thing, they move forward, you introduce a new idea. Facilitating learning doesn't have to be heavy-handed, it doesn't have to be hard, and it can be eminently relevant to each student, and it results in these really unique, one-of-a-kind educations, of course, because every human is a unique, one-of-a-kind person, and it prepares them perfectly for their path forward in a way that other people can't compete with, because they haven't, they've been forced through one particular vein, and they maybe didn't even occur to them that there were 50 other options.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I'd like to hear more about, maybe like specifically, because each of your children have very unique paths and very distinct jobs.
Yeah.
And, I'd love to hear just, I guess, more specifically, and you touched on it a little bit, as you saw their interests sort of changing or growing, and how did that come together then how did it culminate sort of in university, or in a portfolio, or in a transcript, or was that just sort of like the culmination of all experiences, or maybe talking
Yeah,
about.
I mean, we didn't know if they would all go to university, but I planned as their mom with the idea that they might, right? Because my goal, from my perspective, my goal as a parent and as an educator, was to make sure that when my kids were ready to launch, whether that was 17, 18, 25, whatever, it's not a race. When they were ready to launch, they would have the tools they needed to do whatever it was that was next for them. And I recognized that when my kid was 11 and said, I want to be a fire person, or when they were 13 and said, I want to be a writer, that maybe they did, and maybe this was also a phase, right? Like, you have to continue to prepare them for the fact that also we evolve as people. And that question of what do you want to be when you grow up? Well, that's ridiculous, because it assumes that growing up is one destination, and it assumes that it's a static thing, when actually what we have to be preparing our kids for is this continual evolution and re-evolution, rebirth of career, of personal life, of relationships, as the world moves forward. Oh, here's Leah. Yay. I'm going to let her in. Can you spotlight her?
Yeah.
And this is one of the key things in terms of, we think about how do we prepare young people for the world of work? To me, this is one of the really big ones, is that core to that is evolution as an individual, and, as workers or business owners or whatever that looks like. The technological age is fast evolution. We're watching that in, the pace at which knowledge expands, and, a number of other things. And one of the core skills they need is that ability to be agile, to move quickly, to reinvent, to think through what it is that they have now and what they can do with that to get to where they're going next.
That's so good. Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
welcome.
Hi,
Leah.
Leah.
Sorry to throw you into the spotlight.
Hello, I'm so sorry.
You arrived.
We are on the top of a mountain, and it takes us a train and a funicular and then a little electric taxi to get up to the chalet that we're staying in.
We almost feel bad for you, Leah, except that sounds totally dreamy.
This is the world of remote work in action. So
that's exactly what I said at the beginning. I'm like, sometimes it's how it is. We've just been talking about, I gave a little intro to the history of Omnis and of where we're at. And we've been talking a little bit about, Brittany had some questions about my kids specifically as they became adults, because she's got teens. And we were just getting into the kind of the good part around what is needed for the world of work. And I was just talking about evolution, agility, the ability to shift and change and grow through phases, and know how to do that for learning. Do you want to maybe introduce yourself and tell a bit about your family first before we carry on?
Sure. So I'm Leah Jovy-Ford. I'm Jenn's co-founder and the chief operating officer for Omnis. I am a mother to 4. I've got 2 of my own kids who are 9 and 12. I have homeschooled, home educated them from the beginning. My 2 stepkids were flexi schooled, which in the UK means they attended school 4 days a week, and then they did forest school for 1 day. But since COVID and since the pandemic, we've basically homeschooled them all together. And we are, I suppose we don't particularly identify as such, but you probably call it unschooling. So we have a very flexible, we don't have any specific formal learning with them. We had wanted to travel and we're now just getting, so they're all here with me this week. So we're kind of just getting back to some traveling with them. And, you know, we're seeing quite how rich and powerful tool it is for all of the things that Jenn has just mentioned: agility, flexibility, adaptability. Oh, look, the train's delayed.
And they're learning about the world of work by watching today, aren't they?
They are, indeed, yes.
That's great. Well, welcome. We are glad to have you. And yeah, so if you guys want to just kind of, I didn't know if there was just a back and forth conversation or kind of discussion, and we can sort of jump in with questions as we go. Feel free, anybody, to drop questions in the chat as this back and forth happens. But otherwise, you guys go ahead. Yeah.
Should we walk it back, Jenn, to when we first met? Because that's probably where our
that's a good origin point for the world of work piece. Totally.
So I hit the road and became what most people identify now as a digital nomad back in 2004, 2005. And I started a blog to just kind of write about the experience that I was having and the things that I was learning about running my business from anywhere on the road. And it was obviously quite new at the time, and there weren't many people doing it, or certainly not blogging or writing about it. And the blog became quite popular, got quite a lot of press. And I met Jenn, who you were just about to hit the road, I think, as we were kind
of left in 2008. Yeah.
So we were in the middle of our kind of stint. And I met Jenn, I'm not entirely sure how now, probably through the blog, or through mutual acquaintances. And we did a few bits of work together. Jenn came and I think you were editor of the blog for a while, and we created a couple of ebooks, and you specifically focused on how to travel with your kids. And then we've kind of been around each other ever since until 2020. Do you want to take over, Jenn? Because you came to me.
Yeah. So, right. We were, at that time, I'd spent the last 7 years doing marketing and content development for travel companies, essentially. And of course, when the pandemic hit, that all disappeared completely. Like all of my work within a 6-week period disappeared. And Leah's one of these people that has just been in my orbit always. And from time to time, a couple times a year, we'd have a call where we just would chat about like what was going on and what we were learning and what our projects were. We've been looking for ways to work together and collaborate throughout the last dozen or so years, because we work really well together and we both respect each other's minds. And, you know, there's just a lot of overlap in our core values. And I said, well, you know, I guess I'm going to go back to doing some support for people that are world schooling, homeschooling, because I see that the school systems are burning down right now. So maybe I can help a little. And Leah said, well, you know, would you like to have help with that? And I thought, yeah, I absolutely would, because of course, you know, she also home educates her kids. She's very modest in her description of herself, but she's absolutely brilliant at remote work. She's one of the minds of it. She's the person that coined the term location independent, which has become the origin point of the digital nomad movement. So she knows this space and the future of remote work better than anyone I know. And so it was really a treat and a privilege to get to work with her on that. And that was the beginning of, I already explained to them how, you know, we just patched the ship all summer for people who were stuck, and then went, okay, wait a second. Like, there's a bigger thing happening here. What can we do to reconfigure that? And so I was just getting into sort of what we came to when we stepped back and reevaluated what would this look like, and how subject matter buckets were going to be out, skills development and preparing people for the world of work was going to be in. But what's emerged out of that is a really different way at Omnis Education of looking at learning. And our curriculum, instead of being history, geography, science, and all these disconnected bits of things that we try to cobble together, now orbit around 4 essential questions. And those are, who am I? What is the meaning of my life? How do we learn and thrive as a species? And what is my responsibility to the planet? And so under Leah's extreme, like, amazing, competent process development, we've spent thousands of hours as a team developing a totally new way to look at learning and to develop a process for curating these questions. Leah, do you want to talk a little bit about like why those questions and why we think that, you know, this particular way of learning is the future?
Yeah, I'm just going to repeat those 4 questions for Randall. So who am I? What is the meaning of life? How do we learn and thrive as a species? And what is our responsibility to the planet? So those four we've streamlined and streamlined and honed. We started off with a few members of our team working together to think about how we would kind of do a curriculum if we were to do it differently. And we ended up with about 100-page document and about 50 to 60 essential questions, which we kind of looked at and thought, we can't do this. We can't build something around this because it's too much. So we kept honing and we kept honing and we kept talking, and we boiled it down to these 4 questions. And what we've then since developed is a process and a framework, which they're such huge questions that if it's fascinating to ask your kids those questions and to see where it takes them. And some kids can and will also be overwhelmed by such big questions, and particularly as kind of a learning a framework almost. If you want to sit them down and do something more than just have a conversation around those questions, what we've developed is a framework and a process and learning journeys and learning pathways that guide people through some of the questions. So we've developed a framework that we know we've got the right framework when someone can ask us, but what about this? And we know where it goes. We know which question it sits in. We know which particular area. So we've got the process of change baked into all of the questions. And the process of change is a 3-step process. And the first step is to understand more. So before you can do anything, you need to understand the context and the history and the background and why things are the way they are. How are things currently? What exists in the world today? And why has it got to be this way? And then when you understand that, you can look at how you might want to do that better or design that better. And then when you've got a design and a kind of plan or an approach or something to aim for, you take action and you put that into place. And to do that, you might need to learn some new skills or find some additional resources. So we've got this 3-step process baked into each of those 4 questions. We also have another framework, which, we all know that we all learn when things are relevant and they matter to us, and at various points things matter to us when they're kind of closest to home. So we start off with me as the sort of central focal point, and then we move 1 step out, which is community, and our first community is typically family or the kind of household or the town or the village that we live in or grow up in, and then we take it 1 step further out, which is world, and that's the planet, and if necessary we take it 1 step further out to universe. So we've got these 3 core frameworks that are kind of built into and baked into the version of the curriculum that we have, and we create learning journeys around all of those that are kind of theme-based, that guide learners through specific questions. So we can dive deeper into each question and go as deep as we need to. At the moment, we're a kind of 3 levels down. You can see this on our site, so we can pop a link to our site, and there's one of the things we've already got, one of the questions we've already got framed out at one of the focus areas at Meaningful World. So you can dive down and see to where we've got, and then we have a team dedicated to curating resources around each specific area, and they are intentionally looking for diverse resources of all kinds. So that's diversity of all kinds. So we look sort of geographically, culturally, racially, socially, ability-wise, neurodiversity, so that we present as many perspectives as possible.
Yeah. So just, to reiterate, we believe that the purpose of education is change. So regardless of how you are educating your kids, you should be doing that with an eye towards how are they going to change their own lives, their communities, their world, the planet, and how do you equip them to make that kind of change? And so that's why we have set things up the way we have it on this education. But of course, there's lots of different ways to do that, and people have been doing that for thousands of years. And then beyond that, if the purpose of education is to make change, then what we need to give people are the skills that they need to make that change for themselves. Right? So thinking about what skills do young people need and what does this future of education look like, we believe that given the set of tools that we have now, what we can see now, that the future of education is probably a hybrid learning environment that is unique to every single student. There will be things they learn in person in community, and then there would be, and I would go far as to say there should be, a significant component of their education that is now online. And we get pushback about that occasionally, but look what happened during the pandemic. People who said there was no possibility that life and work could be done online were instantly proven wrong, and the whole world struggled. Why? Because we have not, in the last dozen years, when we've had access to the ability to train people to work in a hybrid way, big companies hadn't done that. And so they had a workforce that was completely unskilled at this new way of living and working, only because they had been told that it couldn't be done, right? So go ahead,
We're
Leah.
also now in the period of kind of post-pandemic and post many lockdowns. I know some areas of the world are still experiencing lockdowns, but what people are calling the Great Resignation, which is companies are now starting to force people back into the workplace and into the office. And if any of you are active on LinkedIn, you'll see that one of the big kind of popular themes and topics at the moment is the Great Resignation, where people are starting to really consider their options and choices and look at remote work as, it's not just a nice to have or a perk, but it's something that they will decide whether to take a job on or not. And I think one of the most prominent people, in fact, I was reading about him yesterday. Someone fairly senior in Apple has resigned because Apple are starting to force their employees back to the office. And he's just said, no, thanks. And when more and more people at those levels start to question it and start to resign and start to walk away, because there are many, many, many more remote opportunities these days, we're already seeing people resign, and we're already seeing people move from jobs where they are being forced back into an office that they don't want to be in, because they've seen that, there's no real benefit to it, and they can quite adequately do their work from home or from wherever they choose around the world. Being forced to go back is causing many people to go. We do have options. And that's something that's happening now, and I think we're going to see it a lot more.
The other piece of that is remote work specifically empowers people who've been marginalized in previous frameworks of work and learning. For years, I've talked about the ways in which I think remote work is very specifically empowering to women, because the majority of the caretaking roles still fall to us on both ends of the age spectrum. And many, many, many women that I know have been forced to make a choice between their families, their people that they love, their core values, and their career path. They're stuck in economically depressed situations because they don't have the option to go elsewhere to look for work outside of their location bound lives, because they don't have the skills that they need to work online. So, in addition to just being a nice to have and a perk, and I guess, of course, we can work in most jobs remotely, it's also a tool that allows people to better their lives, make the change they want in their lives as individuals without having to sacrifice the other things that matter to them. And, we've been talking a lot at Omnis in the last couple of weeks about the ways in which this kind of learning could also be a real help to displaced people and refugees. And we're working on a solution that we think will support that, because, we no longer need to be stuck geographically. We can live and work online in this world in a way that supports our offline in-person goals and dreams and lives. I was just seeing if there were questions on this. Same with Meta and Facebook, and same with civil service everywhere. Absolutely. Yeah. So in terms of the future of education, like, what do we need to do to get there? Like, I think often when we talk to people, there's this sense of like, yes, okay, it's obsolete. We know that. We've all experienced that in some way. We want something better, but what does that mean? What does that look like for our kids? How do we actively do that? What does it look like when they're 5, 11, 14, entering university or the workforce? Leah, I know you've got some real clear thoughts and opinions about that.
I think one of the key skills, and it's something that we see at Omnis, is communication. And that's specifically communicating online, because it's, we've just been at the World Economic Forum and we've been in person, and there isn't really a replacement sometimes for being in a room with people and being able to collaborate and talk to them face to face. And we can't always do that. And the ability and the effectiveness of what you get done and how productive you are and what results you can achieve when you're online is entirely dependent upon your ability and your efficacy in communication. And it's many things. It's being able to talk. It's being able to write well. And that doesn't mean, grammatically correct and with no spelling errors or any of those kinds of things. It means being able to communicate your message, your idea, your point well enough so that people understand it. And that's a skill that people aren't generally taught very well for online situations. So, you know, people are taught to write, and you write your arguments in an essay, and kind of, you know, in a, I don't know, a 3-page essay or a 2,000-word essay. But if you're also needing to do that in, you know, we use Slack as a communication tool for our company. People don't have time to wade through 10 paragraphs or like a 10-page document ever, really. You know, you'll lose them after, if we can't communicate things succinctly and well, you will lose them after a couple of paragraphs. And there are a couple of studies that show that the kind of nature of our attention span is changing because of the online world, and that people tend to read in snippets and kind of brief snatches of information, and they scan pages and they scan things, because that's, you know, with Twitter and TikTok and all, and Instagram and the stories and all of the messages and the ways that we are being communicated to these days, it's very much these sort of brief, almost headline things, and that's quite a skill to be able to do that. And you know, we certainly notice with most companies who work online, many companies use Slack as a tool for communication. It's one of probably the most, I would say, probably the most popular tools for group or company communication. And there is a way of writing effectively. It's like writing a Slack message that looks very different from writing a document. So we use something called a meeting culture on this. So we don't have, every time we have a meeting, we have a document for it, and we spend 10, 15, 20 minutes at the beginning of every single meeting and allow everybody to read the document. And it has everything in the document that we are going to cover in the meeting. And then, so everybody's already on the same page 15, 20 minutes afterwards. And then we just run through questions, and it's a really efficient, Amazon use it, which is where we lifted it from. But it's an efficient and effective way to communicate a lot of information quickly, effectively, allow plenty of time for people to ask questions and clarifications. And it's things like that, you know, in the real world that work, and that kids, and certainly, you know, schools aren't teaching children how to communicate effectively online.
You know, in terms of, as I'm listening to you, Leah, I'm thinking the 3 words that come to mind for communication are clear, succinct, and direct. You know, helping young people to develop the skills to communicate in that way is really important. And then, you know, I've got a few bullet points there, like, what do we do to get there in terms of rethinking education for our individual kids? And first of all, realizing that school is not enough. And it's not the end all be all. You know, if your kids are in school, that's fine. If that's the place that they need and want to be, we're not anti-school necessarily if people are self-directing into it and there's consent in them being there. But it's never going to be enough. You know, they can't possibly teach your kid everything they need to know, even if in the best of schools. And it's not the end all be all. There are other ways to get there. Recognizing the power of these hybrid models. Like, you cannot learn remote work, you cannot learn remote communication without actually doing the thing. So putting your kids in situations where they're going to have the opportunity to practice that is really important. And then focusing on the skills for remote work and evolution. So this idea of how do we make change, teaching your kids actively, online and offline, this 3-step learning of understand more. That's the core first step to making any change or any learning. But you can't stop there. Knowing a lot of things, but not having the skills to do anything with them isn't helpful. You know, that's kind of the absent-minded professor that we can all think of, who spend their life in academia up here thinking, but nothing ever comes of it, right? So design better, teach your kids how to teach them design thinking, teach them ways to get beyond the frameworks they know and ideate completely differently, and then how to take action, which loops you back around to the understand more, because when you take action, you screw things up and you learn, and then you shift and you do something, you know, now you know more. So now you tweak your design. So now you take action. So that cycle, I think, is super important in how to get active in preparing your kids for the future of work, whatever that might be. And then just resisting the one size fits all mindset. You know, the whole idea of, are they keeping up? Are they getting behind? That presupposes that there's one answer to that for all kids, and there just isn't. And as long as we're locked into that idea of ahead and behind in comparison to some norm that we actually disagree with, that's why our kids aren't in school. That's going to be crippling for everyone.
I think the world of work as well, and not just remote work, but the way that the world of work is going is also very results, performance, and output based. It isn't about qualifications.
Totally.
It isn't about assessment. It's about, you know, particularly if you're working online or remotely, it's at the end of the day, when people work for us, I don't care how they do it or when they do it. It's, if the output is exactly what we need, the job is done. It's a good one. Totally. We're looking at performance, and that's it. And it's, you know, that's a very different model that is being used in education, which is meet these needs and meet these standards and meet these assessments, and it's all very clear, and here's what you need to do. And we need creative thinkers to solve the world's biggest problems. We need people who can critique what currently exists. We need people who can communicate that well. We need people who can design better solutions, and we need people who can work collaboratively, globally, connect with people from different cultures, different societies, different cities, and be able
ways of thinking and being.
Yeah, and be able to get on and also accept that. And we talk a lot about diversity at Omnis, and we tend to gravitate to people like us, and actually we're trying to flip that to sometimes people not like us, because if we all think the same way, it's we're not going to be able to solve some of the difficult problems. Jen, there's a question which maybe you want to answer. So how does Omnis work practically with families, communities? What does a day in the life of an Omnis student look like?
Yeah, that is a great question. So in a very practical way, Omnis Education is a monthly subscription model. So people join us, they pay by the month. We're not interested in locking people in for life and getting people to spend big chunks of money on curriculum that then they find out they don't use. Our people love being with us, our students love learning with us, and they're free to come and go as they please, because that's the essence of self-direction and consent-based learning, right? What it looks like is there are sort of two things that we have on a daily basis for people. One of them is this big bank of resources that you can learn independently with, and your kids can use those. You can use those as an adult because they're not grade level, they're not age segregated. They're things that people of all ages can and should be thinking about and asking questions about and learning through over and over throughout life. Your answer will change to who am I? So we encourage you to dive into those as individuals, as families, as communities and learning centers. We have a way for pods, micro schools, learning centers to use this as part of their active curriculum. We have parents' guides to help you direct your kids if this self-directed learning thing is a little scary and you don't really know how to facilitate. We have resources to help with that. The other piece then is our live learning. And we have about 10 hours a week right now of clubs and quests that are focused on a range of things that kids would enjoy. So our two quests right now are Where in the World Are the Omnist Artists, which is about art, culture, geography, history, all kinds of things get tied into that. The other one right now is Powering the Planet, Examining Earth's Energy Crisis, which is all about energy and climate change and the ways in which we move the world forward. And then we have clubs that happen every week. So there's a story time and activity club. There's a show and tell. There's Minecraft. There's Math Masters. There's an LGBTQ club. There's a teen and tween club. And I'm pretty sure I'm missing at least one, Leah.
Well, we have the Omnis Way Club for parents.
The Omnis Way Club. That was it. Yeah. The self-directed learning club, that the kids can bring anything they want to that and get help forward with what their projects are. And I think that group right now is actually building a game, aren't they, together? They were talking about coding that game next. So it's just a fun, eclectic bunch of things that kids can jump into. And this is where they practice the skills of how to work together and collaborate and build and create communities online and put into practice all these things that will become their ticket forward in the future of the world of work. So those two things are what it means to learn at Omnis. And then the other thing we have that is, I think, unique is we also have a parents club. So every other week we have Omnis Way for adults, and this is for parents, guardians, teachers, facilitators, anyone who's living and working with children to come and get support and help and encouragement around this idea of self-directed learning and how do we facilitate this better, and what are you nervous about this week, and where is your kid stuck, and how can we help you forward, and what can we celebrate that went amazing this week. And that parent community is really important because, of course, it can feel really lonely if you're the only person that is trying to do this really different thing.
Great. Thank you so much for clarifying that. Yeah, because I love the whole philosophy that all the 4 questions, and then to bring it into, okay, specifically then for each individual, this is going to look very distinct, but to still have that hub. I think sometimes, at least in my case, when they get to doing their self-directed learning, it can feel kind of isolated if they don't have a network of people where it's like, okay, collaboration, that sounds like a great thing, but like, where are the other people that we can collaborate with? Yeah. To have a hub that, that network that you can feed in different strengths, different gifts, but on a project that they're doing together. I think that's That's an amazing
We're
opportunity.
seeing Minecraft work really well for us as a tool, because we have something called Omnisopolis, which is an Omnis specific Minecraft world that is kind of monitored and facilitated by our Minecraft guide. But the kids all go in, they started off by talking about and agreeing the kind of community rules and the world rules that they all wanted to sort of live by. And then they go in and they build their stuff and they agree what they're going to build, and they have joint projects, and it's turning out to be a really powerful tool for collaboration and creativity and connection and problem solving.
That's amazing. And the people that are a part of, I guess, your network, are they kind of generally also world schoolers, or are there different, what do you?
No, not necessarily. I mean, we kind of have two groups of people that use our stuff. One is homeschoolers, world schoolers, people who are all alternative ed minded. That's the low hanging fruit. They already get it. They know what we're trying to do, and they want that actively. And then people whose kids are in school, but they're recognizing like they're not getting everything they wish they were getting. Maybe socially, you know, if they live in a place where their kids aren't getting the kind of support they need for the kind of person that they are and the way they want to show up in the world. Maybe, you know, in terms of problem solving and academics, maybe in terms of the skills that they need for remote work and that, you know, that online hybrid learning. So we have those kinds of people. And then we have pods and micro schools and learning centers that have groups of young people that use our stuff together. And some of the world schooling ones are fun, because the idea moving forward is that as young people are moving around, this becomes a central hub for them to stay connected to the people that they love in person and in the real world too, and continue to learn forward together.
Yeah, that's awesome. I have a couple of good friends that are world schooling. I was wondering about that piece of it, like to have that consistency, I think is really, really important for them. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Well, I'm curious if anybody else wants to chime in. We have about, you know, a little less than 10 minutes until the hour. So if you do have questions, you can feel free to unmute yourself, or
please,
or just you could type it in the chat as well. While people are maybe typing some questions, if either or both of you guys would like to enter your contact information too, as I didn't have nearly enough time as I would have liked to just kind of scour the website and, like, you know, really get to know the ins and outs of Omnis and what it does, and how we could benefit from it. So I know that the website is there, but okay.
So I popped my calendar link in there. One of the things that's just really fun for me is to talk with families about what's happening with their kids and help them figure out kind of what's next. And for some people that's Omnis, for others it's not at all. But having gone this full arc, you know, from being a classroom teacher through not sending our kids to school, through launching them all into adulthood and helping, you know, hundreds of other families do the same. I love to encourage other families forward. So if you have questions, if you're interested in Omnis, if you're feeling stuck with your kid and you can't quite crack it, book a call. Let's talk. It'll be fun.
That's perfect. Amazing. Yeah.
And I see Leah's putting in our company websites and the website for the school with our 4 essential questions. We do encourage you to dive into those too. Yeah, there's lots of fun things. And also, if you have ideas, if you have thoughts for us, you know, send them over. Oh, you put in Omnis Allies. We hadn't even talked about that, Leah. Can you talk about that for a little bit? Because that's pretty awesome.
One of the things that we are deeply and strongly committed to is diversity of all kinds and equity and belonging. And one of the sort of projects that we're working on as a learning resource is called Omnis Allies, which is the goal of which is to dismantle discrimination of all kinds. So we are currently, I hope it should be built within the next few days. We've got a learning resource, which will be the first one. We've got 3 essential questions for that particular resource, and they are: what is discrimination? Why is racism one of the hardest forms of discrimination to dismantle? And how do we achieve equality? And so we'll be building 3 to begin with, those high level questions of resources. So the first one is almost complete, which is what is discrimination? And we've got all kinds of definitions and resources that help people just dive in and understand all the different types of discrimination that exist, the terminology, the phrases, kind of the language that people use around that. And then we'll keep diving deeper into each of the different types of discrimination, and hopefully create a really rich and comprehensive learning resource.
Oh.
I think this is one of the most important things too, in terms of participating in a global workforce, as work becomes increasingly an online thing that people not near us, not like us, are participating in with us. That skill set around moving beyond discrimination of all kinds, inclusivity, but not just inclusivity, actually creating belonging for people from all different walks of life, all different age groups, all different neurodiverse types, learning styles, races. That's vital. And in the future of work, the people who have those skills will thrive, and those who do not will be left behind.
That's so true. Yeah. Yeah, I've just so appreciated how, I mean, I've really been challenged to think, I mean, I think a lot about that question, like, what is education for? But I think to constantly be challenged about, like, how am I guiding my child in their own path? And yet, what are those things in the world that are really essential for all of us to know, for every child to, and you know, these topics like discrimination and stuff. Yeah, those are the ones that would, I don't know, I guess they are more universal, and they're just so important for every child to know. So that's a good challenge. I need to revisit, like, okay, what are those things that, like, are, I want the foundational things that
It's like what's relevant, what matters, and not just
Yeah.
once, but over and over. So, you know, even as an adult, at whichever decade you're in, you know, who am I is crucial. What's my responsibility to the planet? You know, what's the meaning of life? You know, what's the meaning of my life? You know, how do we learn and thrive, or how do I learn and thrive as a human? They're things, they're questions that matter at every stage of life, that really, you know, we should all probably be thinking much more consciously about those, because we tend to tread down these well-worn paths without really questioning them, without really thinking. You know, what we're encouraging people to do, and particularly younger kids and younger learners, is to question it, you know, to think about these things all the time, so that they can consciously forge the paths on their own, instead of just following the, you know, school, university, get a job, get married, have kids.
Randall has a question about this all in school agenda. This is the first time I've encountered that. I just pulled up that link. Leah, do you know anything about that?
I do not. I'm just pulling it up to the Global Initiative on Out of School Children.
Well, thank you, Randall, for putting something new and interesting in our basket. We don't have an opinion right now, but we will love learning.
Well, my quick opinion, very, very quick opinion, just looking at there. So All in School, the Out of School Children Initiative ensures children can access good education and are equipped to complete primary and secondary school. So often what many of these things do, oh, we can't hear you. Are you on mute, Randall? Are you on mute?
You're muted.
At the bottom.
That's it. Sorry.
There we go.
Yeah.
I'd better fess up that it's me using my husband's connection, because he's out.
Not Randall then.
It's Mary, but anyway. No, I just thought it's interesting that there's this big thing about getting all children, you know, a global initiative to get all children in school.
Yeah.
All in education would be a more helpful approach, wouldn't it?
Yes.
I just wondered what you thought of it. I mean, I can see why people think that it's beneficial, but yeah.
It's great, you know, an education is probably, I think we can probably all agree, is possibly better than no education whatsoever, and kids being left without any access to any resources anywhere to learn and to, you know, access anything kind of outside of them, beyond their village or wherever they live. Things like this are still playing within the system, and what we're trying to do at Omnis, and what we're very focused on, is not necessarily kind of replacing the system at all, but playing outside of it and showing people that it isn't necessary, it isn't the only way, it isn't the only option. It doesn't have to be either or, either. It's not binary. It's, you know, there can be all sorts of bridges to the conventional system, but it's also, there are different ways, and there are different ways to kind of create a life and craft a career without having to follow the well-trodden path of a conventional education system.
For some people, that well-trodden path is actually causing harm. You know, I think about the many young people that come to us who are neurodiverse in some way, and the ways in which the school has actually harmed and caused trauma for them. Like, there are children who shouldn't be learning in those environments, and what are they supposed to do otherwise? And so that's why we think it's really important to create options, to create change, to create opportunity, and provide tools for people to be able to educate themselves in the way that's meaningful for them. And I think, and that, you know, that kind of comes full circle to what is the future of work? The future of work is having control, having tools, having skills, having the ability to self-determine in your career and in your work life, in much the same way that we believe children should have that ability in their schooling and in their education.
And online gives people the ability to do that. It makes it scalable. scalable, it makes it accessible. If they can have access to a device and internet, when we're looking at the work we're looking to do with displaced people and refugees, if we can find the resources and funding to provide kids with even just, a couple of computers, between, 20 to 30 of them. There's the study that we've seen previously where, kids have access to a computer in a wall, and they teach themselves how to use it to do all kinds of different things. It doesn't, they're so creative and resourceful that actually giving them access to these tools and giving them access to a Wi-Fi or an internet connection is, can be life-changing in itself. They don't need one device each, just some access and platform.
Thank you.
Well, thank you guys so much. We're, I think, out of time, but if anybody has any other questions, I know that these two would be more than happy to respond through the website, through Instagram. I found you both, so I will be continuing to follow your journey. And yeah, we really appreciate your time. Really appreciate you scaling that mountain. Yeah, we look forward to hearing a lot more from you guys. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Brittany. We appreciate the time. Thanks for being here, everyone. Take care.